If you just walked into a movie theater for like the last 15 minutes of an Avengers movie, you would be completely lost.
Oh, absolutely. You just see explosions and glowing portals everywhere.
Right. There's a giant green guy smashing things. Half the characters are crying, and you have absolutely zero idea what the stakes are or how anyone even got there.
Yeah. Or, imagine trying to build a custom home by starting with the roof.
Exactly. You're just holding a bunch of heavy shingles up in the air, hoping the foundation just magically appears underneath your feet to support it.
It's an absurd visual.
It is. But apparently, that is exactly how a massive portion of the population approaches some of the most complex, fiercely debated texts in human history.
Which brings us to today's topic.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've customized this exploration specifically for you, the listener, taking a stack of source material and, well, extracting the core mechanics of a very specific worldview.
Yeah, and today our mission is to unpack a highly detailed theological framework based on a presentation by a creator named Joel Richardson.
And the topic is Israel's coming covenant with the Antichrist.
Right. The goal here is to trace his argument for a future 7-year Middle East peace treaty. And he builds this entirely on a very specific chronological reading of biblical texts.
Starting all the way back with Moses and moving up to the prophet Daniel. But before we dive into that, we really need to set up some vital ground rules for this deep dive.
Yes, this is absolutely crucial. Because the source material we are looking at involves, politically charged modern geography, deeply held religious doctrines, and some highly specific eschatological or end times claims.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
It is. So it's crucial to understand that we are not taking sides here, we're not endorsing these viewpoints, and we are not validating these religious claims as absolute truth.
We're just neutral guides.
Exactly. We are strictly here to synthesize and convey the ideas and the framework exactly as they're presented in the original source material.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before the source material even touches on dense biblical prophecy, the creator actually opens with a surprisingly long story about coffee.
Yeah, it's quite the pivot from ancient apocalyptic texts.
Right. But it sets up his whole methodology. He talks about a company called Peregrine Coffee Roasters, which is run by his friend Stephen.
And he admits to being a bit of a troll.
A troll? How so?
Well, he used to lead a house church where he was a bit older than the rest of the congregation, and the younger members would show up on Sunday mornings with their, artisanal single-origin beans and fancy pour-over kits.
Oh, I know the exact type.
Right. So he would purposefully serve them the most generic, toxic-looking, dark-race instant coffee he could find.
Just to mess with their coffee snobbery.
Exactly. He didn't even like the stuff himself. But this eventually leads to an intervention from his friend Stephen.
The coffee roaster.
Yeah. Stephen gives him this very serious lecture on gut health. He points out that the dark, burnt, instant lumberjack coffee the creator was serving is incredibly acidic.
Which just destroys your gut microbiome.
Right. And the advice Stephen gives next is what really anchors this whole metaphor. He says, if you want a strong cup of coffee without destroying your stomach, you should take a light or medium roast and just brew it extra strong.
So you get all the subtle flavor profiles, but it's better for your gut.
And he actually claims brewing it that way kills off the caffeine, because usually lighter roasts have higher caffeine content.
Which honestly, scientifically, that sounds a little suspect to me. Like usually longer extraction means more caffeine in the cup, not less.
Yeah, the chemistry might be a bit fuzzy there.
But the actual science of the brew isn't really the point he's trying to make, is it?
Not at all. He uses this whole anecdote about respecting the craft of coffee roasting and really understanding the foundational elements of a process to pivot into his main critique.
A critique of how people read biblical prophecy.
Exactly. He identifies this widespread tendency that he calls Gentile or Christian arrogance.
Gentile arrogance.
The argument is that many modern readers look down on the Old Testament. They treat it as something obsolete or overly legalistic, while feeling a sense of supremacy because they have the New Testament.
Which brings us right back to the Avengers movie and the floating roof analogies. The creator argues that most Christians get prophecy entirely wrong because they start at the end of the book.
Right, they start by reading Revelation.
Which is, it's essentially like trying to understand a complex, multi-layered recipe by only staring at the final plated dish.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, without ever bothering to look at the list of raw ingredients that actually went into the pan.
It's exactly that. You're trying to understand the final presentation without knowing the chemistry that made it happen. The foundational rule of his framework is that to understand the end of the story, you have to start at the beginning.
You have to start with Moses.
Right. He argues that virtually every primary biblical doctrine is rooted right there in the first 5 books. And Paul even warns about this arrogance in Romans 9 through 11. To understand the end, you need the Torah.
So with those ground rules set, let's just follow the Creator's method. Let's start with Moses.
Okay.
What did Moses actually say thousands of years ago that supposedly predicts a future Antichrist treaty?
Well, the source points us to the book of Exodus, chapter 34.
Verses 12 through 17, right?
Yes. And in this framework, the Torah is viewed essentially as the constitution for the nation of Israel. In Exodus 34, God, who describes himself as a jealous God in the text, gives a strict command to the Israelites.
As they're preparing to enter Canaan.
Exactly. The command is to be exceedingly careful not to make treaties with the pagan inhabitants of the land. Because historically, the temptation wasn't just political.
It was economic, right? Agricultural.
They needed to know how to farm the new land, which meant making deals with the locals who worshipped fertility gods.
The language used here is incredibly specific. I found this linguistic distinction from the source just fascinating. The text warns that the treaty will be a snare.
Right, a snare.
And the Creator points out that as society has modernized, we've lost our rural survival skills. He asks, how many people today have ever actually skinned a large mammal or built a hunting trap?
Very few.
Exactly. Because we've lost that context, we read the word snare and we picture a tripping hazard.
Right. We think of a loose rug or a misplaced rock that makes you stumble.
Yeah, you skin your knee. But a snare is not designed to trip you. A snare is a trap designed to kill you.
Full stop.
The Creator emphasizes that God is warning that these treaties will lead directly to spiritual death. But I really have to ask for some clarification here.
Go for it.
Taking that ancient warning and dropping it onto the 21st century sounds extreme. Is he saying that Israel today isn't allowed to have normal diplomatic relations?
Well, no.
Like trade agreements or border security deals? Because that seems impossible for any country in the global economy.
The source actually provides some very important nuance there. He clarifies that normal diplomatic or economic relations are perfectly fine.
Okay, so a trade agreement isn't a deadly snare.
Right. The snare happens when the nation places its ultimate spiritual trust in those political treaties for its survival instead of trusting in God.
Oh, I see. It's about idolatry.
Exactly. The treaty itself becomes an idol because the leadership believes a piece of paper is what saves them from destruction.
I get the distinction now. And following his rule, the later prophets just pick up this theme from Moses and run with it.
They do. The source cites the prophet Isaiah, specifically Isaiah 28, where the leaders in Jerusalem are rebuked for making a covenant with death.
A covenant with death. Wow.
Yeah, and an agreement with the grave. They enter this treaty because they think it will protect them when an overwhelming scourge sweeps through, which historically meant a massive flood of foreign invasion.
Like the Assyrians or Babylonians. The text even says they made lies their refuge.
They assumed a regional superpower would spare them, but the prophet claims their trust is misplaced. He also points to Isaiah 10, which predicts a time when a surviving remnant of Israel will no longer depend on the one who struck them down.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The Creator takes these ancient verses and uses them to completely reject a popular modern cliche.
Which one?
The idea that Israel would never actually trust an outsider, or specifically a Muslim regional leader, to guarantee their security.
Ah, yes. He finds that assumption completely illogical based on recent history.
Right. He points to the Oslo Accords from the 90s and more recent Abrahamic Accords.
With the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan.
Yeah. His argument is that the precedent for these regional security umbrellas is already established. Normalizing relations with predominantly Muslim neighbors is standard practice now.
So his logic is, if they are willing to sign these accords now, why wouldn't they sign a larger, more comprehensive treaty in the future?
Exactly. But if this framework insists that Israel is going to fall into this deadly diplomatic trap, the immediate question is, when?
And for how long, right?
Yeah. Does the Creator give us a ticking clock?
He does. And to find it, he moves from the warnings of Moses to the highly specific mathematics of the prophet Daniel. But first, he briefly touches on Joel chapter 3.
Joel 3. Okay. What's the context there?
It claims a time is coming when the land of Israel will be divided, and God will judge the surrounding nations in the valley of Jehoshaphat.
Which he identifies as the Kidron Valley.
Right, located right between the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives in modern-day Jerusalem. The nations are judged specifically for scattering the people and dividing up the land.
Okay, so dividing the land is a prerequisite. But the crux of this entire timeline, the real mathematical blueprint he uses, comes from Daniel 9.
Verses 24 through 27, the famous 70 weeks prophecy.
We really need to walk through this math carefully because it is incredibly dense.
It's highly technical.
If you're listening to this and trying to map it onto current events, this is the formula that drives his entire worldview.
So according to his reading of Daniel 9, an angel reveals that there is a decreed period of 70 weeks for Israel, but these are not weeks of days.
They're weeks of years.
Yes, so 70 cycles of 7 years, totaling 490 years. The text outlines that 69 of these weeks, so 483 years, will pass continuously, starting from a historical decree to rebuild Jerusalem.
And after those 69 weeks, the text says the Anointed One, or Messiah, will be cut off and have nothing.
In this Christian framework, that cutting off refers to the crucifixion of Jesus.
But wait, if 69 weeks happen continuously leading up to that moment, why doesn't the 70th week happen immediately after?
That is the big question.
How do you just hit pause on a 490-year divine stopwatch?
Well, the Creator argues for what theologians call a prophetic gap. The logic is that because the Messiah was rejected and cut off, the prophetic clock for the nation of Israel was essentially paused.
Oh, I see.
This ushers in an undetermined gap of time, often referred to as the church age. The stopwatch remains paused until a very specific triggering event restarts it for the final 70th week.
And that final week is the last 7-year period. During this time, the text says a ruler to come will make a firm covenant with the many, which interpreters usually understand as Israel and surrounding nations.
Right.
But right in the middle of that week, 3.5 years in, this ruler violates the treaty, puts a stop to sacrifices, and sets up what is called the Abomination of Desolation.
Yes.
Now, I want to push back on something here. When people hear ruler to come or Antichrist, the pop culture image is total world domination.
Like Emperor Palpatine ruling every inch of the globe.
Exactly. But the Creator points out a logical contradiction in Daniel. The text explicitly says there will be war until the end.
What's fascinating here is how he uses strict logical deduction to address that.
Yeah, because if a single ruler controlled every single nation with absolute power, there wouldn't be any war.
Right. To have a war, you must have a resisting military. And for that, you need a resisting government.
So this figure will have massive global authority, but not absolute global control.
Just like a modern superpower, they have influence everywhere, but they don't literally rule every country's domestic policy.
Right. But if this 7-year timeline is so clear to the Creator, why is it one of the most heavily debated passages among theologians?
Oh, it's debated endlessly.
Yeah. I mean, what is the disconnect there?
It all comes down to a grammatical issue we can call the pronoun problem. The text in Daniel 9 repeatedly uses the pronoun he.
He will make a firm covenant.
He will put a stop to sacrifice. The massive theological debate is over who that he actually refers to.
Because some mainstream interpreters argue that the he making the covenant isn't an antichrist figure at all. They argue it's actually Jesus.
Yes. Their logic is that Jesus' historical ministry lasted about 3.5 years.
Fulfilling the first half of that final week.
Right, and his crucifixion effectively put a stop to the need for animal sacrifices.
So what does this all mean? How does the source respond to that?
Aggressively. The Creator pushes back by zooming out to the rest of the book of Daniel. He points to 3 other chapters. Daniel 8, 11, and 12.
Okay, what happens in those chapters?
In all 3, there are explicit references to stopping the regular temple sacrifices and setting up the Abomination of Desolation.
We should probably define that term for the listener. Abomination of Desolation sounds terrifying, but what does it actually mean historically?
Historically, it refers to a catastrophic desecration of the Jewish temple. The ultimate historical blueprint was an event carried out by a Greek king named Antiochus Epiphanes around 167 BC.
What did he do?
He marched into the Second Temple, stopped the daily Jewish sacrifices, erected an altar to the Greek god Zeus, and sacrificed a pig right there on the altar.
Wow. The ultimate defilement of sacred space.
Exactly. It's universally understood as an act of profound evil.
So let me guess. The Creator uses those surrounding chapters to prove a pattern. Are the actions in chapters 8, 11, and 12 depicted as evil acts carried out by a villain?
Precisely. In every single one of those instances, stopping the sacrifices is the horrific work of a villainous figure, either the future Antichrist or Antiochus Epiphanes.
So he's asking, why would you look at chapters 8, 11, and 12 where stopping sacrifices is evil, but then get to chapter 9 and suddenly claim it's the holy work of Jesus.
Exactly. He argues it completely breaks the internal logic of the book.
But why would rival theologians do that? Why twist the text, as he claims?
He claims interpreting Daniel 9 as being about Jesus stems from two motivations. First, an anti-Torah bias.
A theological reluctance to believe a future Jewish temple could have any biblical validity.
Right. They can't imagine animal sacrifices mattering again, so they spiritualize the text. And the second motivation is a desperate need to shorten the timeline to validate someone's date-setting predictions.
The doomsday clock problem.
Yeah.
If a YouTuber predicts the world ends next Tuesday, they can't have a literal 7-year countdown waiting in the wings.
No, they have to claim those 7 years were already fulfilled in the past. It's a theological stance called preterism. To make their date-setting work, they reverse engineer the text.
So bringing this all together, his final stance is that we're absolutely waiting for a literal 7-year security agreement in the Middle East.
Yes.
One that will divide Jerusalem, allow the rebuilding of a physical Jewish temple, and force a sharing of the Temple Mount.
That is the complete blueprint of his argument, derived entirely from reading chronologically from Moses to the prophets.
Which brings us back to you, the listener. Why does this deep dive into ancient Greek kings and pronoun debates matter to someone just navigating the modern world?
It's a fair question.
It matters because millions of people use these exact theological frameworks to interpret and actively influence modern geopolitics, Middle East policies, and peace treaties. Understanding this perspective is a massive shortcut to understanding a worldview that shapes real-world decisions every single day.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it leaves us with a highly provocative thought to mull over. The entire architecture of this incredibly complex prophecy changes based on one single rule.
Reading from the beginning to the end.
Exactly, rather than reverse engineering from Revelation. This raises a fascinating question about how we consume all information today. How many of our own deeply held beliefs or our understandings of history or even our daily opinions on the evening news?
Yeah.
How many of them would be completely flipped upside down if we just changed the starting point of where we began reading the story?
It's a staggering thought.
Yeah.
Because if you build the roof first, you might find out years later that you've been standing in the wrong house all along. Thank you for joining us on this custom-tailored deep dive into the source material. We'll catch you next time.